The fold opened where no fold should have been, and the thing that came through it was already gone before the Sodality's eyes could finish drawing it. Wayfinder Tomu Sorel saw it first, because seeing first was the only thing he had ever been good at. He sat in the high blister of the scout skiff Quiet Needle, a small, fast craft no longer than a market hall, and he watched the deep with eyes the veil Sodality had bred for 9,000 years to catch the instant a fold mouth bloomed. He had caught 10,000 of them. He had charted the breath of armadas and the slip of single hunters. He had never, in 200 turns of service, failed to hold a shape in his sight long enough to name it. He failed now. The fold mouth bloomed at the edge of the Tessel crossing, far past where any law allowed a fold, and out of it slid a long gray shape that he saw for exactly 1/3 of a heartbeat. Then his eyes told him the shape was 900 kilometers to the left. Then his eyes told him it had never been there at all. His instruments, every one of them tuned to find what folds, drew the gray shape, lost the gray shape, and drew it again, somewhere it could not have moved to in the time given. Tomu Sorel did not breathe for a while. The Veil Sodality ruled 4,000 worlds by the oldest power there was, which was the power to not be where the enemy struck. They did not build the biggest fleets. They built the fastest folds. A Sodality warflock could open a mouth, pour through it, and close it before a slow people even understood the sky had bent. For 9,000 years, no enemy had landed a blow that mattered, because a blow needs a place to land, and the Sodality had made an art and a religion out of never being in a place. They called themselves the ones the spear cannot find. They taught it to their hatchlings as the first true thing. Be elsewhere, and you cannot die. Tomu Sorel had believed that first true thing his whole life. He had believed it the way you believe the floor will hold you, without ever once thinking about it, because in 200 turns of service, the floor had always held. He had watched enemy fleets, slow and proud and certain, throw their whole strength at the place a Sodality warflock had been, and find empty deep, and he had felt, every time, the warm, clean pride of a people who had solved the oldest problem in the universe, which is the problem of being struck. Other peoples built thicker armor. Other peoples built bigger guns. The Sodality had simply decided to never be there, and in 9,000 years, no one had found a way around it. And that was the proof, Tomu Sorel had always thought, that the Sodality were right about everything. He was beginning, in the high blister of the Quiet Needle, to think that the Sodality might have been right about exactly one thing, and wrong about what it meant. They had been right that the surest way to win is to never be struck. They had simply never imagined that someone could be better at it than them, and kinder than them, both at once, and that the two together would be the end of everything they were. And now, on the small bright readout in front of Tomu Sorel, something was being elsewhere better than they were. He ran the readings 3 times. A wayfinder did not report a thing until he had run it 3 times, because the deep was full of light that lied, of cold rocks that pretended to be ships, and ships that pretended to be cold rocks. And a wayfinder, who cried fold at every shadow, did not stay a wayfinder long. So he ran it 3 times, and 3 times the gray shape was there, and then 900 kilometers to the left, and then nowhere. And 3 times his instruments drew a hull moving faster than a hull could move, with nothing between the start and the finish to show the moving. On the 3rd run, the cold finger of fear pressed into his chest in earnest, because 3 runs was the number that turned a shadow into a fact, and the fact was that there was a thing in the deep that did not obey the rules the deep had obeyed for 200 turns of his watching. He keyed the flock channel with a claw that did not want to move. He gave the bearing. He gave the timestamp. He gave the only honest word he had. Unknown hull, he said. It folds without a mouth. I cannot hold it. It moves like a ghost. The flock channel went quiet in the particular way a room full of proud people goes quiet when one of them says a thing that frightens all of them at once. Then Flock Mother Eschenvorel answered, and her voice carried the calm of someone who had ended 40 wars and never once been somewhere a weapon could reach. Hold position, Wayfinder. Mark it. Everything in the deep can be held. You are tired. He was not tired. He marked it anyway. He turned every eye the quiet needle owned, toward the place the gray hull had last been seen, and he gave the deep his whole attention, the way a hunter gives the grass its whole attention. The deep gave him nothing back, no drive bloom, no fold mouth, no heat. The Sodality's own ships ran hot and proud, lit like festivals, because for 9,000 years there had been no reason to hide. You cannot shoot what you cannot find, and you can never find a fold in time. The gray hull did the opposite of everything Tomu Sirel knew. It ran colder than the dark it hid in. It carried no fold mouth he could read. It simply was in one place, and then, between one look and the next, it was in another, with nothing in between to tell him how. A ship that moved like that did not need to be the fastest. It only needed to never be where you aimed. And the Sodality, who had built their whole house on that exact stone, understood in their bones what it meant to meet a thing that did it better. The flock that held the Tessel crossing was the Ninth Veil, 240 warfolds under Flock Mother Eschenvorel, and they had come to the crossing for the simplest reason in the galaxy. There was a small free world there, a quiet place called Anne by the Reeds. 4 million soft people who fished a warm sea and folded nothing and threatened no one. The Sodality did not hate them. The Sodality had simply decided, as it decided every few turns, that a free world was a loose thread, and that loose threads are pulled. The Ninth Veil had come to fold Anne by the Reeds into the Sodality, the way it had folded 1,000 worlds before, gently, completely, without ever giving the world a place to push back against. It was, when you stood far enough back from it, the most peaceful conquest in the galaxy. No siege, no bombardment, no burned cities, no long lists of the dead, none of the ugly, slow cruelty other empires used. The Sodality simply appeared over a free world all at once, from every angle, 200 ships in the sky in a single instant, and the free world looked up and understood, with the clean finality of arithmetic, that there was no longer anywhere to put a foot down and say no, and so the free world said yes, because saying yes was the only thing left to say, and the Sodality folded it into the careful filed order of 4,000 worlds, and called it kindness, and moved on. Tomu Sirel had charted 40 such arrivals. He had never once seen a free world get a chance to choose, because the whole art was to take the choosing away before the choosing could begin. It was the cleanest thing he knew, and he had been proud of it for 200 turns, and he had never, until the gray hull, thought to ask what it felt like on the underside, to be the world that woke up one morning already owned. The gray hull had come to the crossing too. Nobody had asked it to. Nobody knew its name. It had simply arrived, the way weather arrives, and parked itself in the long dark between the Ninth Veil and the warm little sea, and now it would not be held. Tomu Sirel watched the empty place where it should have been, and he felt the first cold finger of a thought he would spend the rest of his life trying to put down. We are the ones the spear cannot find, he thought. So what is this thing that finds us, and then chooses not to throw? For the gray hull had not fired. That was the part that made the cold finger press harder. It had been in the deep for the length of a slow breath. In 3 places it could not have reached, watching 240 proud warfolds with their guns lit and their crews sure. And it had done nothing at all but be there, and then not there, and then there again. A thing that cannot be hit and chooses not to strike, is not a coward. Tomu Sorel knew that the way he knew his own claws. A thing like that is waiting to see what you will do. It is giving you the one gift the Sodality had never once given a free world in 9,000 years. It was giving them a chance to turn around. He did not say that to the flock channel. He was a wayfinder, not a fool, and the flock mother had ended 40 wars by being elsewhere, and you do not tell a person like that, on an open channel, that the loose thread might be the one holding their whole house together. He marked the gray hull's empty place one more time. He named it in his own log, quietly, the way you name a thing to make it small. He wrote, in the careful script of a people who filed everything, Contact 1, Hull Gray, Behavior Impossible, Designation Pending. Then the gray hull moved again, and this time it did not go to a place his instruments could draw. This time, it simply was beside the quiet needle, close enough that Tomu Sorel could have counted the dark plates of its skin if his eyes had agreed to believe what they saw. A wall of cold gray metal, 3,700 meters long, where, one heartbeat before, there had been only empty deep. It did not fire. It did not signal. It hung there, vast and silent, and somehow patient, the way a mountain is patient with the bird that lands on it. And then it was gone again, back to the long dark between the flock and the warm little sea, and Tomu Sorel understood that it had come close on purpose, that it had shown him its size on purpose, that the message was for him alone, and the message was very simple. I let you see me, the gray hull had said, without a single word. Remember that I could have chosen not to. Now go and tell them what is here. So he did. The flock mother did not believe him, and that was the most natural thing in the world. Eshin Vorel had spent her whole long life proving that a thing seen once and never again was a thing that had not really been there. Folds played tricks on the eye, the deep bent light. Young wayfinders, hungry to matter, had been seeing ghosts at the edge of empire since before her hatching. She heard Tomu Sorel's report, she heard the catch in his voice, and she filed both under the heading she had used 100 times, which was nerves, and she ordered the 9th Veil to proceed. The plan was the plan it had always been. 240 warfolds would open their mouths at once, all around the warm little world of Anne by the Reeds, and pour through, and close, and be everywhere over the soft fishing people before those people could so much as look up. It was not a battle. The Sodality did not fight battles. It performed a sudden, total, bloodless arrival, and the world it arrived over simply discovered that it now belonged to the Sodality, with no place anywhere to plant a foot and refuse. That was the whole art. You do not beat a free world. You appear over all of it at once, and freedom has nowhere left to stand. She thought, as she gave the word, of the wayfinder's frightened voice, and she put it down the way she put down everything that threatened her calm. She had not held a flock for 200 turns by letting young eyes rattle her. A thing that cannot be held is a thing that is not there. A thing that folds without a mouth is a thing the instruments drew wrong. There was an order to the universe, and the order was that the Sodality could not be struck, and that order had held for 9,000 years, and one tired wayfinder, at the edge of empire, was not going to unmake it with a story about a gray ghost. She had buried that certainty so deep that it was not even a thought anymore. It was the floor. She stood on it without looking down. Eshin Vorel gave the word. The 9th Veil opened its mouths. 240-fold mouths bloomed in the deep, vast circles of bent light, each one a door from where the flock was to where the flock wanted to be. It was a thing of terrible beauty, and the flock mother had seen it 10,000 times and it still moved her, the way the oldest power always moves the one who holds it. The flock poured forward into the doors, and the gray hull was already on the other side. It was not possible. The flock mother knew exactly how impossible it was, because she had personally written half the laws of folding that said so. To be waiting on the far side of a mouth, you had to know where the mouth would open, and you had to get there first. And the only way to get there first was to open your own mouth, which the sodality would see, because the sodality saw every mouth. The gray hull had opened no mouth. Tomu Sorel had watched the whole sky for it. There had been nothing, and yet when the first war folds of the ninth veil came through their doors above the warm little sea, the gray hull was hanging there in the long, dark, cold, and silent, and exactly between the flock and the world, as though it had simply walked through a wall the rest of the galaxy could not see. The first warfold, the sleek answer, came through its mouth with guns lit and crew sure, and it fired at the gray hull, because that was what you did when something stood between you and your arrival. It fired a full lance, the Fold Empire's proudest weapon, a spear of bent space that did not so much hit a target as relocate the target's heart to somewhere uncomfortable. The lance went through the place where the gray hull was, and the gray hull was no longer there. It was 900 kilometers away. Then it was right where it had been. Then it was beside the sleek answer, close as a whisper, having crossed the distance in no time the instruments could measure, and through no mouth the instruments could see, and it did not fire. That was the part Eshin Vorel would turn over in her mind for the rest of her life. It came close enough to gut the sleek answer with a single shot, and it did not shoot. It hung there beside the proud warfold, cold and gray and patient, and then it was gone again, and a single tight beam of light reached the sleek answer's hull and wrote 3 words on it in the trade script every fold people could read. Turn around now. That was all. No threat past those 3 words. No fire, just the words, burned gently into the paint of the sleek answer's flank, where the whole flock could see them, and then the gray hull elsewhere, watching. The captain of the sleek answer, a careful old soul named Veth Karun, who had folded under Eshin Vorel for 90 turns, did a thing that surprised even himself. He read the 3 words aloud on the flock channel, in a voice that did not shake, because he was too old to let it shake, and then he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, to no one in particular, the thought that the gray hull had put in him in the space of a single pass. He said, it was beside me. It was beside me for a full breath, and it could have opened my hull like a shell, and it wrote me a road sign instead. Veth Karun had ended things, in his 90 turns. He had folded over worlds and watched them learn they were owned. He had never, in all of it, been on the receiving end of a mercy he had not earned, and could not have stopped, and it shook something loose in him that 90 turns of war had never touched, and he sat with it, and he did not fire, and that was the first small turning, though no one but Tomu Sorel, watching from the high blister, marked it. Eshin Vorel ordered the flock to hold. She was not a fool. 40 wars had taught her the difference between an enemy that boasts and an enemy that is simply more capable than you, and the difference is that the boaster wants you afraid, and the capable one wants you gone. This thing wanted them gone. It had said so in 3 words on the side of her lead ship. It had been close enough to kill 10 times, and had killed nothing. A coward could not do what it did. A weak thing could not do what it did. Only a thing that had already decided the outcome could afford to be that gentle. She did not turn around. She had ended 40 wars. She had a flock of 240. She gave the order every flock mother before her would have given, which was to find the gray hull's pattern, because everything in the deep had a pattern, and to fold around it, and to take the warm little world the way the sodality always took worlds, all at once, leaving the loose thread nowhere to push. The ninth veil tried. For 9 minutes, by the Count Tomu Sorel kept in the high blister of the Quiet Needle. 240 of the finest fold warriors in 4,000 worlds tried to get past one gray hull to a world of 4 million fissures, and for 9 minutes, the gray hull was never, not once, where they aimed. They folded above the world. The gray hull was between them and the world. They folded below it. The gray hull was below it. They split the flock and folded on two sides at once, a maneuver the Sodality had used to swallow whole defending fleets, and the gray hull was on both sides, which should not have been possible for one ship, except that no instrument in the flock could keep the gray hull in one place long enough to be sure it was one ship at all. It was here, it was there, it was between. It crossed 900 kilometers in the space of a blink, and left no trail, no mouth, no bloom, no heat, nothing the Sodality's 9,000 years of foldcraft had taught them to read. It simply refused to be in any place a spear could find, and it did it to the people who had invented refusing to be in any place a spear could find, and it did it better than they had ever done it, and it did it without firing a single shot. That was the thing that broke them. Not fear of dying. The Sodality had grown used to not dying. It was the slow, sick understanding, spreading warfold by warfold through the ninth veil, that everything they were, everything they had told their hatchlings was the first true thing, everything they had ruled 4,000 worlds with, was being done to them by a stranger, more easily than they had ever done it to anyone, and that the stranger was choosing, over and over, with perfect patience, not to use it to kill. There is a particular horror that comes to a proud people when they meet, for the first time, a thing that is simply better than them at the one thing they are sure they are best at. It is not the horror of death, death they could have faced. The Sodality had songs for facing death, old and brave. It is the horror of the floor moving. For 9,000 years the Sodality had stood on a single certainty, the certainty that the spear could not find them, and they had built 4,000 worlds on top of it, and now the gray hull was standing on that certainty too, standing on it better, and proving with every blink that it was not a floor at all, but only a thing they had agreed to call a floor, because no one had ever pushed on it hard enough. The gray hull was pushing on it, gently, without a single shot, and the floor was moving, and the whole ninth veil could feel it moving, and there is no fear in the universe quite like the fear of feeling the floor move under a thing you have decided to be sure of forever. It is worth saying what 9 minutes is, to a people like the Sodality, because 9 minutes does not sound like very long. To the Sodality, 9 minutes was an eternity, because a Sodality battle had never in 9,000 years lasted 9 minutes. A Sodality battle lasted a single instant. The mouths bloomed, the flock arrived, the enemy understood it was surrounded, and it was over. Faster than a slow people could draw a breath. 9 minutes of a thing standing in front of them and not dying, and not letting them past was longer than any battle in the whole history of the Sodality. Longer than the songs, longer than anything the oldest flock mother had ever heard of. 9 minutes was forever, and the gray hull spent that forever, the way a patient parent spends an afternoon with a child throwing a tantrum, calmly, without anger, simply being there, immovable and kind, until the tantrum spent itself. The flock could feel the 9 minutes stretching, every second of it, a second in which they were not the people the spear could not find, and the stretching was its own kind of wound, a wound to the one thing they could not armor, which was their certainty about themselves. A warfold called the Bright Refusal lost its nerve first. Its captain, a young proud soul named HFY, who had never in his life been somewhere a weapon could reach him, folded his ship away from the warm little world without orders, opened a mouth, and ran for the empty deep, the one place in the universe where a Sodality ship was always safe, because the empty deep was big, and a mouth was fast, and no one could ever be waiting in all that nothing. The gray hull was waiting in all that nothing. The bright refusal came out of its mouth into a stretch of empty deep, so far from the crossing that no enemy could possibly have known to go there, and the gray hull was there, cold and silent, and exactly in the path, and HFY screamed on the open channel, not from a wound, because there was no wound, but from the pure animal horror of a fold creature who had run to the one safe place and found the gray hull already standing in it. It did not fire on him either. It wrote 3 words on his hull, in the same gentle light, where the whole flock could hear him reading them aloud in a voice that had stopped being proud. Not that way. And then it pointed him home. It did not hurt him with fire. It simply was, again and again, in every empty stretch of deep he folded to, until the only direction left without a gray wall in it was the long road back toward sodality space, back the way the 9th veil had come, back to 4,000 worlds that had never once in 9,000 years been told no. HFY took that road, because it was the only road, and as he took it, the gray hull stopped appearing in front of him, and that was how he understood that the road home was the road it had been leaving open the whole time. Tomu Sorel watched all of this from the high blister, and he wrote it down, because writing it down was the only thing keeping his claws from shaking. He wrote, "The gray hull does not chase." He wrote, "The gray hull waits." He wrote, and then crossed out, and then wrote again because it was true. The gray hull has left exactly one direction open, and it is the direction away from the small world. And it has been holding that door open since the moment it arrived. The flock mother saw it too. She was old and proud, and she had ended 40 wars, but she had not ended them by being stupid, and she could read a board. She could see that the gray hull was not a wall around her flock, but a wall around the warm little world. A wall built of being elsewhere, the only wall the sodality had never learned to climb, because they were the ones who had taught the galaxy there was no such thing as a wall you couldn't fold past. She could have ordered the flock to throw itself at the gray hull until something landed. 240 ships is a great many spears, and even a ghost, she thought, must be somewhere when it strikes, and a thing that is somewhere can be hit. But it never struck. That was the trap, and she saw the trap, and she hated that she saw it. As long as the gray hull never fired, the sodality could not justify the thing they were good at, which was a sudden total arrival, because you cannot suddenly arrive over a world that already has a patient gray mountain standing in front of it, choosing not to kill you. The gray hull had taken the one move the sodality knew and made it useless, not by being stronger, but by being kinder. And kindness was a weapon HFY had no defense against, because in 9,000 years, the sodality had never once needed one. So she did the second thing a flock mother who had ended 40 wars would do. She called for help. She opened a long fold channel back to the heart of the sodality, to the Veil Court itself, where the oldest minds of her people sat in the deepest fold in 4,000 worlds. And she told them, in the careful filed words of her kind, that the 9th veil had met a thing at the Tessel crossing that folded without a mouth, and could not be held, and would not be struck, and that it stood between the flock and a small free world, and would not let the flock arrive, and that she requested, with all respect, the war flocks of the inner veils, because 240 ships were not enough to find a ghost. The Veil Court answered fast, because the Veil Court understood, faster than the flock mother had, exactly what it meant if her report was true. If there was a thing in the deep that did the sodality's one trick better than the sodality, then the sodality was no longer the people the spear could not find. It was just another fleet, somewhere, waiting to be struck. And 4,000 worlds had been ruled, for 9,000 years, on the promise that the spear could never find them. A promise like that does not break a little. It breaks all at once, the way a fold mouth closes, and 4,000 worlds fall into the gap. The Veil Court sent everything. Not the inner veils. All the veils. 11 warflocks, 2,600 warfolds, the largest gathering of fold ships the Sodality had assembled in 1,100 years. Every proud lit hull they had, folding inward toward the Tessel crossing to find one gray ship and prove, before 4,000 watching worlds, that there was no such thing as a thing the Sodality could not catch. Tomu Sorel watched the fold mouths bloom across the whole sky, more mouths than he had ever seen at once, more mouths than most wayfinders saw in a lifetime, and he felt no comfort at all. He had been watching the gray hull for an hour now. He had watched it stand between 240 spears and a small world, and not bleed and not kill. He had watched it leave one door open and heard a panicked captain home through it without a wound. He knew, the way he knew his own claws, that the gray hull was not afraid of 240 ships, and he could not for his life imagine why it would be afraid of 2,600. He was right not to imagine it. The gray hull was not afraid. When the 11 warflocks of the Sodality folded into the Tessel crossing, 2,600 lit and proud hulls filling the deep with the festival glow of a people who had never needed to hide, the gray hull did not run, and it did not multiply, and it did not flinch. It did the one thing Tomu Sorel had learned to expect from it, the thing that frightened him more than any number of ships ever could. It went quiet, and cold, and patient, and it was suddenly beside the very first warfold of the very first inner flock to come through, 3,700 meters of gray metal, where empty deep had been, and it wrote 3 words on that proud hull in gentle light, the same 3 words it had been saying since the start, the only words it ever said. Turn around now. And then it was elsewhere, and the festival glow of 2,600 ships hung in the deep, around a small warm world, and not one of them could find the thing that had just touched their leader, and chosen to let it live. In the high blister of the quiet needle, Tomu Sorel stopped writing the careful filed words of his people. He wrote, instead, in the plain old hatchling script he had not used since he was small, the script you use when you want to be sure you will understand it later, when you are afraid and want to remember exactly what you saw. He wrote, "It is not hiding from us. It is letting us look for it, so we will be busy not killing the small world." He wrote, "It is not fired once." He wrote, 2,600 of us, and it is still the calmest thing in the sky. And below that, in the smallest script of all, the one you use for the thoughts you are not ready to say out loud, he wrote the question that would follow him the rest of his days. What kind of people build a ship that can kill everyone, and spends all its strength on letting them leave? The gray hull had a name, though no one in the Sodality knew it yet, and the name was the Pale Errand. It was 3,700 meters of cold gray alloy, built by a people who had learned, the hard way, across a very long time, that the surest way to win a fight is to make sure the other side never gets to land a blow. The humans who built it had not invented folding. They had done something the Sodality, in 9,000 years of pride, had never thought to do. They had watched a folding empire for 40 years, quietly, from the dark, and they had asked a question the Sodality never asked itself, which was, what is folding actually for? The Sodality used folding to arrive, to pour through a door and be everywhere at once, to win by suddenness. The humans had watched that for 40 years and decided it was a beautiful idea aimed in exactly the wrong direction. Arriving is loud. Arriving needs a mouth, and a mouth can be seen, and a thing that can be seen can, eventually, be hit. So the humans built the pale errand to do the opposite. Not to arrive, but to never be present. Not to pour through a door, but to slip the whole concept of place. Its drive did not open a mouth. It dissolved the ship's own location and let it settle somewhere else. The way fog leaves one field and is in the next without ever crossing the fence, and it left no bloom and no heat and no trail, because there was no journey to leave a trail of. The ship was simply elsewhere, and then elsewhere again, faster than an eye could agree with itself. The crew who ran it numbered 310, and they were not warriors in the way the sodality understood the word. The captain was a quiet woman named Adira Voss, who had grown up on a fold world the sodality had swallowed a generation before, and who had spent her childhood watching a free people learn, slowly, that there had been nothing they could ever have done, because you cannot push back against a thing that is never standing in front of you. She had carried that the way you carry a stone in your boot, every step, for a long time, and then she had stopped carrying it and started building the answer to it instead. She had been 6 years old the morning the sodality folded over her homeworld. She remembered the sky going full of ships in a single breath, and she remembered her father looking up at it, with an expression she did not have a word for until much later, when she finally understood that the word was helplessness. The particular helplessness of a man who has spent his whole life ready to fight for the people he loves and discovers, in one instant, that there is nothing in front of him to fight. You cannot raise a fist at a sky. You cannot stand between your child and a thing that is everywhere at once. Her father had lowered his hands, slowly, and that was the moment Adira Voss had decided something, though she had been too small to know she had decided it, and it had taken her 40 years and a gray ship 3,700 meters long to finish the sentence her 6-year-old self had started, which was, never again, for anyone, will the sky go full of ships and leave a parent with nowhere to put their hands. She had not built the pale errand to take revenge on the sodality. She had built it to give every small world the one thing her homeworld had never gotten, which was somewhere to stand, somebody in front of the cruel arrival, a place to put the fist. The answer was simple, and she had said it to her crew the night they reached the Tessel crossing. In the plain way she said everything. "We are not here to kill them," she had said. "Anyone can kill them. We are here to make sure that for the first time in 9,000 years, a small world gets to stay. We do that by being the one thing they can't fold past. We do not fire unless they make us. We give them a door home, and we keep giving it to them, no matter how many of them come, until they get tired and walk through it. That's the whole mission. We outpatient an empire. Outpatient an empire." Her chief navigator, a long-boned man named Pel Aranen, had repeated it to himself like a prayer ever since, because it was the strangest order he had ever been given, and also the most human, and he had come to understand, over the long, quiet hours of holding the door, that it was the only kind of victory worth the name. You can break a fleet, and the empire builds another. You can burn a court and the survivors crown a new one. But if you stand in front of an empire's favorite trick, and refuse to die, and refuse to kill, and simply will not let it do the cruel thing, day after day, in front of all 4,000 of its watching worlds, then something starts to come loose that no new fleet can bolt back on. The watching worlds start to wonder why the trick stopped working, and a people that rules by a trick cannot survive the world's wondering. So when the 11 warflocks came, 2,600 lit hulls filling the deep, Adira Voss did not flinch, and she did not change the plan, and she certainly did not fire. She walked the long, quiet bridge of the Pale Errand, and she watched the festival glow of the largest fold gathering in 1,100 years on her cold gray displays. and she said one thing to Pel Aranin. More of them means more of them going home, she said. Hold the door. He held the door. For 3 days, the Pale Errand held the door, and it was the strangest siege the galaxy had ever not quite seen, because nothing about it looked like a siege. The sodality folded, and the Pale Errand was elsewhere. The sodality split, and the Pale Errand was on both sides. The sodality tried the trick they had used to swallow whole defending navies, the sudden total surround. 2,600 ships blooming their mouths at once, to appear over the warm little world from every angle, at the same instant. The maneuver that had ended 40 wars, and the Pale Errand met it the way fog meets a closing fist. It was simply already in every gap. It crossed 900 kilometers between blinks. It was beside the lead ship of every flock at once, or seemed to be, and on every lead ship it wrote the same 3 words, and not one lead ship could find it to fire back, and not one lead ship was harmed. On the bridge of the Pale Errand, the work of holding the door was quieter than anyone watching could have guessed. There was no shouting. There were no alarms screaming, no crew flung about by fire that never came. Pel Aranin stood at his cold station and read the deep the way a sailor reads a current, and when the sodality folded a fresh wing into the sky, he simply moved the ship, the way you move a hand to keep a candle from a draft, and the ship was elsewhere, and the wing found empty deep, and Pel Aranin made a small note in the log, and waited for the next one. 310 people kept the Pale Errand alive in the long dark, and most of what they did was wait, and watch, and stay calm, because calm was the weapon. The sodality fought in bursts of beautiful violence, mouths blooming, lances flying, the whole sky lit like a festival. The Pale Errand fought the way water wears a stone, without hurry, without anger, with a patience that had been built into its bones by people who had learned that the cruel and the proud always tire first, if only you refuse to give them the fight they came for. Adira Voss had a saying she repeated to the night watch, low, almost to herself. We are not stronger than them, she would say. We are only less tired. Stay less tired than the Empire, and you have already won. There was a young rating on the Pale Errand, a signals hand named Coral Bren, barely past her training, who had asked the captain on the first night the question the whole crew was thinking, which was whether they should not just end it. They had the gun for it. 310 people on a ship that could not be touched, facing a fleet that could not touch them, and a single proper salvo, Coral Bren had said, would break the whole ninth veil before the rest even arrived. And then there would be no fleet to hold the door against, and the small world would be safe for good. It was a reasonable question. It was the question almost any navy in the galaxy would have answered yes to. Adira Voss had heard it out, and then she had answered it the way she answered everything, plainly, and Coral Bren had carried the answer the rest of her life. We could break them, the captain had said. You're right. We could break the whole fleet in an afternoon and never take a scratch, and then we'd be the gray ship that murdered a fleet, and the 4,000 worlds would learn that the way to be safe from us is to never let us get close, and the next empire would build thicker walls and meaner guns, and the small worlds would keep paying. Breaking them is the easy thing, Coral. The easy thing is always the one that makes more war. We're not here to win an afternoon. We're here to end the trick, and you don't end a trick by being scarier than the people doing it. You end it by being seen, by everyone, doing the trick better, and refusing to be cruel with it. That takes longer. It takes 3 days instead of an afternoon. But it doesn't make the next fleet. It unmakes this one. Now hold the door, and don't fire, and let them get tired. Coral Bren had held the door, and had not fired, and somewhere in those 3 days, she had stopped being a rating who wanted to win, and started being something her people did not yet have a clean word for. the kind of person who can hold a loaded gun for 3 days and choose, every second, not to need it. By the second day, the sodality had stopped trying to surround the world and started trying, simply, to land one blow, to prove it could be done. Because if it could not be done, then everything they were was a lie, and a navy of 2,600 ships will do almost anything rather than learn that everything it is a lie. They threw lances by the thousand into the places the pale errant had been. They folded ambushes into the empty deep, betting the gray hull would come there, the way they had caught fleeing fleets 1,000 times. The pale errand was never where the lance went, and never where the ambush waited, and it never, in 3 days, fired a shot in return. And slowly, ship by ship, the war flocks of the sodality began to understand the shape of the thing they were inside of. They were inside a lesson. The gray hull was teaching them, with infinite patience and without spilling a drop of their blood, the exact feeling they had given 4,000 worlds for 9,000 years. The feeling of pushing against a thing that is never there. The feeling of every blow finding empty deep. The feeling of being the strong one, the proud one, the one with all the ships, and discovering that strength is nothing at all against a thing you cannot reach. It was the sodality's own gift, handed back to them, polished, and it did not even have the mercy of being cruel. The gray hull never gloated. It never struck. It just held the door and waited, and the door it held open, always, every hour of every day, was the road home. Wayfinder Tomu Sorel had stopped sleeping by the 3rd day. He sat in the high blister of the quiet needle, and he watched, because watching was his gift, and because he could not look away. He had filled 4 logs now. He had stopped writing in the careful filed script entirely. He wrote in hatchling letters, the small honest ones, and what he wrote, over and over in different words, was always the same thing, which was that the gray hull was not winning the way a conqueror wins. It was winning the way the truth wins. Slowly, and then all at once, and you cannot fold away from it, because it is not in any place. It is just true. On the 3rd day he saw the first crack, and being a wayfinder, he saw it before the court did. A warfold of the 6th Veil, a ship called the Long Custom, opened a mouth and folded for home without orders. Then 2 more, then a whole wing of the 6th Veil, 11 ships, folding away from the warm little world and toward sodality space, not in a rout, because there was nothing chasing them, but in something quieter and far more dangerous to an empire. They were leaving because they had understood. They had spent 3 days unable to touch a thing that would not touch them, and somewhere in those 3 days, the thought had gotten loose in their minds, the same thought that had gotten loose in Tomu Sorel's on the very first hour. And once a thought like that is loose, you cannot fold away from it either. The thought was this: if there is a thing in the deep that can do to us what we do to everyone, and it chooses not to kill us, and it only ever points us home, then we are not the people the spear cannot find. We are just people. And if we are just people, then the 4,000 worlds we hold by the promise that we are more than people are not ours by right. They are ours by a trick that has stopped working, and the worlds will see it stop working, because the gray hull is doing it in front of all of them, on every channel, where 4,000 worlds are watching their masters fail to land a single blow on one patient gray ship for 3 days. The Veil Court saw the 11 ships of the Long Customs wing fold for home, and the Veil Court did the thing that frightened empires always do, the thing that has ended more empires than any enemy ever has. It decided that the answer to a thing it could not beat was more of the thing that was not working. It called the Last Veil. The Last Veil was not a fleet. It was the oldest and deepest fold the sodality had, a weapon held in reserve for 9,000 years and never used. because it had never been needed, because the spear had never found them. The last veil could open not one mouth but 1,000 at once, across a whole region of deep, a fold so vast it did not move ships through space so much as fold space itself around a thing, until the thing had no place left to be. It was the Sodality's final answer to the impossible problem the gray hull posed, which was a thing that survives by never being anywhere. Very well, said the Veil Court, in the cold reasoning of frightened old minds. If it survives by never being anywhere, then we will take away everywhere. We will fold all the deep around the Tessel crossing closed at once, every place it could blink to, 1,000 mouths sealing a region of space the size of a small star, and the gray hull will have nowhere left to be elsewhere, and a thing with nowhere to be must, at last, be somewhere, and a thing that is somewhere can be struck. It was a good plan. It was the best plan the Sodality had made in 9,000 years. Tomu Sorel, watching the slow vast bloom of the last veil begin at the edge of the crossing, a wall of folding light rising in every direction at once, understood that it might even work, that the humans might finally be cornered, that the gray hull might finally be forced to be in a place, and his heart, the proud old Sodality heart that had served 4,000 worlds, did not lift at the thought. It sank, because he had watched the gray hull for 3 days, and he had learned the one thing about it that the Veil Court, in its deep cold fold, had not. He had learned that the gray hull was not afraid of being somewhere. It had been somewhere 100 times, beside 100 lead ships, close enough to kill and choosing not to. The gray hull did not survive by being nowhere. The gray hull survived by being kind, and there is no fold in the universe, not the last veil, not 1,000 mouths, not all the deep folded shut at once, that can take kindness away from a people who have decided to spend it. He wrote one last line in the small, honest hatchling script, before the last veil's light filled his whole sky. He wrote, "We are about to learn what it does when we leave it no room." He was wrong about only one thing. He thought he would be afraid to find out. He was not afraid. He found, to his own surprise, sitting in the high blister of a tiny scout skiff at the edge of the largest fold his people had ever made, that he wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to see what the gray hull did when the whole empire folded the sky shut around it. Because 3 days of watching had taught him a thing he was not ready to say to the court, or the flock mother, or even to himself, and the thing was this. He hoped the gray hull won. The last veil closed, and a region of deep the size of a small star folded shut around the gray hull, and for one held breath, the whole Sodality believed it had won. 1,000 mouths bloomed at once and sealed, edge to edge, top to bottom, a sphere of folded space with no gap left anywhere, no empty deep to blink to, no far stretch of nothing to be waiting in. Nothing but the warm little world at the center, and 2,500 remaining warfolds packed close around it, and, somewhere inside that sealed sphere, the gray hull with nowhere left to be elsewhere. The Veil Court watched on its deep cold displays. The flock mother watched from the 9th veil. 4,000 worlds watched on every channel, because the Sodality, in its pride, had broadcast the whole thing, certain it was about to show the galaxy that there was no such thing as a ship it could not catch. Tomu Sorel watched from the high blister of the quiet needle, just inside the edge of the fold, and he did not breathe. For the length of that one held breath, the gray hull was somewhere. The last veil had taken away everywhere, and so the gray hull was finally, simply, in a place. 3,700 meters of cold metal, hanging in the center of a sealed sphere, with 2,500 spears pointed at it, and nowhere left to go. And the Sodality, at last, after 3 days, fired. Every warfold in the sphere fired at once. 2,500 lances of bent space converging on the one place the gray hull had to be, the largest single blow the sodality had ever struck, enough to relocate the heart of a moon to somewhere uncomfortable. It was the moment 9,000 years had been building toward, the proof that the spear could find anything, the lesson the watching worlds were meant to learn. The lances arrived at the center of the sphere. The gray hull was not there. It was elsewhere. There was no elsewhere. The last veil had sealed every place a ship could be, and the gray hull was elsewhere anyway, because the humans had built it to slip the concept of place itself. And 1,000 mouths sealing every place do nothing at all to a ship that does not move through places, that simply stops being present here and starts being present there, with no journey in between for a fold to catch. The sodality had folded shut every road. The pale errand had never been on a road. It was beside the lead ship of the inner veil, 3,700 meters of cold gray, where the lances were not, and the 2,500 spears the sodality had thrown at the center of the sphere kept going, past the empty center, outward, toward each other. Tomu Sorel saw the whole shape of it in the instant before it happened, because seeing the whole shape of a thing was his gift, and he had time to feel one pure, clean spike of terror, not for himself, but for the 2,500 ships of his people, who had just fired everything they had, at a point in space, with nothing in it, and a wall of their own kind on the far side. And then the gray hull did the thing it had been doing for 3 days, the thing it had come to the Tessel crossing to do, the only thing it had ever done. It saved them. It was suddenly not beside the lead ship, but everywhere along the path of the converging lances at once, or seemed to be, a gray blur slipping between every spear and the ships those spears were about to gut. And where the gray hull passed, the bent space of the lances bent again, around it, away from the hulls, harmless, into the empty deep at the center, where there was nothing left to harm. 2,500 killing blows, thrown by a panicked empire at a ghost, every one of them aimed by the geometry of the sealed sphere straight at another sodality ship. And the gray hull caught them all, the way you catch a child that is tripped, without anger, without a word, and set them down soft in the empty middle where they hurt no one. Not one sodality ship was harmed. By their own 1,000-fold blow, in the trap they had built to be sure of killing the gray hull, not one of them so much as scorched their neighbor, because the gray hull had spent the strength it could have used to escape on making sure the Empire's panic did not slaughter the Empire. Tomu Sorel understood, watching it from the high blister, exactly what he had just seen, and the understanding sat on his chest like a stone. The gray hull had been given, for one instant, the perfect chance to escape. The last veil had sealed every place, and in the sealing, the sodality had thrown 2,500 lances into a single empty point, and the gray hull, in that instant, could have simply blinked elsewhere and let the lances do what panicked lances do, which is find the nearest hull and gut it. 2,500 ships would have torn each other to scrap in the sealed sphere, and the gray hull would have walked away clean, and the sodality would have done the thing to itself that the gray hull had refused, for 3 days, to do to it. It was the easiest victory in the universe, handed to the gray hull on the Empire's own panic, and the gray hull had looked at that easy victory, at 2,500 enemies about to kill themselves, and had said no, and had spent itself catching the blow instead. Tomu Sorel had served the sodality for 200 turns, and he tried, sitting there, to imagine a single flock mother who would have made the other choice, who would have saved the enemy from its own mistake when the mistake would have won the war, and he could not. He could not imagine it. That was when he stopped, finally, being a man of the sodality, somewhere in his chest, in a place no court could reach. A people who would do that were not his enemy. A people who would do that were the thing his people should have been, and had decided, 9,000 years ago, not to be. And then it wrote 3 words, not on one hull this time, but in light, vast, across the whole inner face of the sealed sphere, where 2,500 ships and 4,000 watching worlds could read it at once. You can stop. That was the moment the war ended, though no one fired another shot, and no one signed anything, and it would take the sodality 40 years to admit it. It ended because 2,500 warfolds had just thrown everything they had at a thing they could not touch, and the thing they could not touch had used the chance to save their lives instead of taking them, and there is no recovering, as an empire built on being the strong one, from watching the thing you cannot beat be kinder than you, in front of all 4,000 of your worlds. For a long moment after the words hung across the inner face of the sphere, nothing happened, and the nothing was the loudest thing in the whole 3 days. 2,500 warfolds floated in the failing fold, their lances spent, their trap broken, their lives handed back to them by the thing they had just tried with all their strength to kill, and every captain on every bridge in that vast doomed fleet sat with the same understanding settling over them at the same time. They had thrown everything. There was nothing left to throw that they had not already thrown and watched fail. And the thing they could not beat had used their worst moment, the moment of their panic, not to finish them, but to save them. And there is no answer to that. There is no order a flock mother can give to a fleet that has just been forgiven by its enemy. The whole grammar of war breaks down. You cannot avenge a kindness. You cannot rally against mercy. You can only sit in it, and feel it, and understand that the war is over, not because you lost a battle, but because you have been shown, in front of all 4,000 of your worlds, exactly what you could have been and chose not to be. The last veil came apart, a fold that vast cannot be held long, and once the blow had failed, there was nothing to hold it for, and the 1,000 mouths unsealed, and the deep opened back up, and the empty stretches of nothing returned, the empty deep the sodality had always run to, the one safe place. And the warfolds of the sodality looked at the open deep, the road home that the gray hull had been holding open the whole time, even now, even after they had tried to murder it, and one by one, then in wings, then in whole veils, they took it. They did not rout, there was nothing chasing them. They simply, at last, after 3 days and the largest blow their people had ever struck, got tired, the exact way the captain of the Pale Errand had said they would, and they walked through the door home, because it was the only door, and because the thing holding it open had earned, by then, the right to be obeyed. Flock Mother Eschenvorel was among the last to leave. She held her flock at the edge of the emptying deep, and she looked for a long time at the place the gray hull was and was not, and she did a thing no flock mother of the sodality had done in 9,000 years. She opened a clear channel, not a war channel, not a fold channel, just a plain voice in the open dark, and she spoke to the gray hull directly. "What are you?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was closer to a surrender. The gray hull answered. It had not spoken in words once in 3 days. Only ever the 3 burned into hulls and into the sky, and now, on the open channel, a plain voice answered her, a woman's voice, quiet and tired, and without any pride in it at all. "We are the people from the world you took the same way you came to take this one," said Captain Adira Voss. "A long time ago, before you'd remember, there was nothing we could do, because you were never standing in front of us, so we built a ship that could stand in front of you. That's all this is. We got tired of small worlds having nowhere to push back. Now they have somewhere. This little one gets to stay." There was a silence on the open channel. "You could have killed my flock," the flock mother said. "Twice. In the sphere, you held our own blow off us. Why?" "Because killing your flock makes the next flock," said Adira Voss, "and the next, forever, and the small worlds keep paying for it. We don't want your flock dead, flock mother. We want your trick dead, the one where you arrive everywhere at once, and a free world has nowhere to stand. That trick died here, in front of 4,000 of your worlds, when 2,500 of your ships couldn't land one blow on one of ours in 3 days. You felt it die. So did they. You don't need us to kill you. You just need to go home and explain to 4,000 worlds why the spear couldn't find a ship for 3 days. We'll let you do that. It's a worse weapon than anything we carry." The flock mother was quiet for a long time. "What do we tell them?" she said at last. "Tell them the truth," said Adira Voss. "Tell them there's a thing in the deep now that does your trick better than you, and it only ever points people home. Tell them the small worlds aren't loose threads anymore. Tell them whatever you like. We won't correct you. We're not going to chase you, flock mother. We never were. Chasing is your god, not ours. We just stand in front of the cruel thing and wait for everybody to get tired. You got tired, go home." The flock mother was quiet, and then she asked the question that an old proud mind asks when it has finally seen the shape of its own defeat and wants, before it goes, to know whether the thing that beat it understood what it had done. "You let the small world keep not knowing," she said. "And by the reeds. 4 million fishers, and they will look up tonight and see only stars. They will never know you stood here. They will never thank you. Why would you spend 3 days and risk a ship like yours for a world that will never know your name?" "Because that's the whole point, flock mother," said Adira Voss, and for the first time there was something warm in the tired voice, something almost like a smile. "A world that has to know it was saved is a world that learned it could be taken. We don't want them to learn that. We want them to go on fishing and folding nothing and threatening no one, the same tomorrow as today, like nothing ever happened, because nothing did happen, because we made sure nothing happened. The best thing we ever do, we do so that nobody finds out it needed doing. You spent 9,000 years making sure every world knew exactly who owned it. We spend our days making sure the small worlds never have to think about it at all. That's the difference between us. That's the whole difference. You wanted to be known. We just want them to be free. And the freest thing of all is to never have had to wonder." And then the gray hull was elsewhere, the way it always was, gone from the place it had never quite been in, and the open channel held nothing but the soft static of the deep and the slow, warm glow of a little world that had, against 9,000 years of certainty, gotten to stay. Tomu Sorel folded for home with the 9th veil, in the high blister of the quiet needle, with 5 full logs of small honest hatchling script, and a thing growing in his chest that he did not have a word for yet. The Veil Court, when the fleets came home, did the thing courts do. It met in the deepest fold, and it argued, and it issued findings. It found that the contact at the Texel crossing had been a single enemy vessel of unknown make, possessed of an irregular fold drive, and that the 9th veil and the supporting flocks had withdrawn in good order after determining that the small world held no strategic value. It found that the matter was closed. It found, in the careful filed words of a people who filed everything, that nothing of importance had occurred. The findings were broadcast to 4,000 worlds, the same 4,000 worlds that had watched, on every channel, for 3 days, the entire Sodality fleet fail to touch one gray ship, and then try to murder it, and then be saved by it, and then go home. The findings said nothing of importance had occurred. The 4,000 worlds did not believe the findings. That was the thing the Veil Court could not fold away from, and Tomu Sorel saw it begin within a turn of the fleet's return, the way he saw everything, first. A small world at the edge of sodality space, a place called Demon Hold, that had been folded into the Empire 1,000 years before, and had never once pushed back, because there was nothing to push against, sent a quiet message to the Veil Court. It did not threaten, it did not rebel. It simply asked, in plain words, a question that no world inside the sodality had ever dared ask in 9,000 years. It asked, is it still true that you can find any spear, anywhere? Because we watched the crossing, and we are asking honestly, and we would like to know. The Veil Court did not answer. It could not answer. The honest answer was no, and the honest answer was being whispered now from world to world, the way a thought gets loose and cannot be folded away from. And Tomu Sorel, sitting in his quarters with 5 logs of hatchling script, understood that the gray hull had told the simple truth on the open channel. It had not needed to kill them, it had only needed to be seen, by 4,000 worlds, doing the sodality's trick better, and choosing to be kind, and then to let the sodality go home and try to explain it. There was no explaining it. The trick was dead. The fear that had ruled 4,000 worlds for 9,000 years had been replaced, in 3 days, by a question, and an empire built on fear cannot survive a question, because a question is a thing the spear cannot find. Tomu Sorel resigned from the Wayfinders the following turn, which surprised everyone but himself. He had served 200 turns. He had charted 10,000 folds and never once failed to hold a shape in his sight. And then, a gray ship had come through a door that should not have existed, and he had failed to hold it, and the failing had been the most honest thing that ever happened to him. He did not resign in anger. He resigned because he had spent 3 days watching a kind of strength his own people did not have a word for, and he had decided that he wanted to spend whatever turns he had left learning to say it. He kept his 5 logs. He did not give them to the court. The court would have filed them under nothing of importance occurred, and Tomu Sorel had decided he was done filing true things under false headings. Instead, he did a thing that was, for a sodality officer of 200 turns, very nearly a crime. He took a small fast ship, not a warfold but a plain trader, and he went out to the small worlds, the folded-in worlds, the 1,000-year quiet worlds like Demon Hold, and he told them, in his own honest voice, exactly what he had seen. He told them about the gray hull that moved like a ghost and never fired. He told them about the 3 words it wrote on every proud spear. He told them about the sealed sphere, and the 2,500 lances thrown at an empty center, and the gray hull spending the strength it could have used to escape on catching the Empire's own panic before it could murder the Empire. He told them the captain's plain tired voice on the open channel. We got tired of small worlds having nowhere to push back. Now they have somewhere. And the small worlds listened, and the thought got loose in them too, the way it had gotten loose in Tomu Sorel on the very first hour, and the way a thought like that always does, and the sodality, world by quiet world, began to come apart, not in fire, not in war, but in the slow, unstoppable way that a fear comes apart once a single question has been asked of it and not answered. It took 40 years. Empires do not fall in an afternoon, even empires whose one trick has died, and the Veil Court fought the coming apart the only way it knew, with findings and broadcasts and the careful filed words that said nothing of importance had occurred. For a while the court tried other answers, because frightened minds always try the old answers first. It tried building a faster fold, a drive that would let a sodality ship be present, and not present the way the gray hull was, and it poured the wealth of 40 worlds into the work, and the work failed, because the humans had not built the pale errand out of a faster fold. They had built it out of a different question, and you cannot reach a different question by going faster down the same road. The court tried hunting the gray hull with new eyes, with arrays of wayfinders strung across whole sectors, certain that with enough eyes a thing must finally be held, and the arrays found nothing, turn after turn, because there was nothing to find. The court tried, at the very end, the thing that frightened empires always come to last, which was to make an example of a small world, to fold over some quiet free place and take it hard and fast and total, to prove to the 4,000 watching worlds that the trick still worked, that the spear could still find anyone, that nothing had changed. It chose a world. It sent a flock, and the gray hull was already there, cold and quiet between the flock and the small world, holding the door, writing 3 words on the proudest hull, and the flock came home having taken nothing, and that was the last time the court ever tried, because the watching worlds had seen it fail again, and an empire can survive losing once. It cannot survive being seen to lose the same way twice. The second time is not a defeat, the second time is a law. But you cannot fold away from a question, and the question spread faster than any war flock could chase it, because Tomu Sorel was not the only one telling the story now. Every world that heard it told the next. The captain of the Bright Refusal, the young proud soul who had run to the empty deep and found the gray hull already standing in it, told it. Hesh Moral had folded home with the words, "Not that way," still burned faintly into his hull, and he had spent a long time trying to scrub them off, and then one day he stopped scrubbing and started telling people what they meant. Even flock mother Eshen Vorel in the end told it. She was old, and she had ended 40 wars, and she sat down before the Veil Court in the deepest fold and she said, put plainly, that the findings were a lie, that something of the greatest importance had occurred at the Tessel crossing, that the spear could no longer find every ship, and that the only honest thing left for the sodality to do was to stop being the people the spear could not find and start being people, simply, among other people, before the question took the choice away from them. The court censured her. It did not matter. The thing she said was true, and the truth was already loose, and the truth, like the gray hull, was not in any place where the court could strike it. And by the reeds, the warm little world of 4 million fishers, never knew how close it had come. The fold mouths had bloomed and unbloomed in the deep above its warm sea. 2,600 ships had filled its sky and emptied it again, and the fishers had looked up and seen nothing but the ordinary stars, because the whole war had been fought in the long dark beyond their sight by a gray ship that left no trail and an empire that would broadcast no defeat. They went on fishing. They folded nothing and threatened no one, and they got to stay, exactly as the captain of the gray hull had promised, and that was the whole point. And the fact that they never knew was, somehow, the most human thing about it. The pale errand had not come to be thanked. It had come so that a small world would get to keep on not knowing how nearly it had been taken. There is a fisher on and by the reeds, even now, who tells her grandchildren a story about a night when the stars seemed to flicker, a long time ago, before any of them were born. Her own grandmother had seen it, she says, a strange shimmer in the dark above the sea, like the whole sky holding its breath, and then it had passed, and the morning had come ordinary and warm, and the fishing had been good. The grandchildren do not believe her. They think it is the kind of story old women tell. They do not know that the shimmer was 2,600 warships and a gray ghost, and the whole future of their warm little world balanced for 3 days in the dark, and that the reason the story is only a flicker of the stars and not a story of fire and chains is that a ship they will never hear of stood in front of the thing that came to take them and held the door and let it pass. That is the gift the pale errand gives, Not a story of being saved, the absence of the story of being taken. A grandmother, with nothing to tell but a flicker in the sky, and good fishing, and grandchildren who get to roll their eyes at her, free, on a world that got to stay. Adira Vos had grown up on the other kind of world. She had grown up where the story was not a flicker but a wound, where the grandmothers told their grandchildren about the morning the sky went full of ships, and there was nowhere to put their hands. And the children believed it, because it was carved into everything around them. She had built the pale errand so that there would be more of the first kind of world and fewer of the second, and she never once, in all the long years she captained it, let her crew tell a saved world what they had done. The not telling was the work. The not telling was the point. A world that knew it had been saved would spend its nights looking up afraid. A world that never knew would spend them fishing. She wanted the fishing. She had wanted the fishing her whole life. The gray hull itself was never found again, and that was the part that became a kind of legend in the slow 40 years of the Sodality's quiet undoing. The Sodality looked for it. Of course they did. At first, before the looking stopped making sense, they sent wayfinders out to the deep with every eye they owned, tuned to catch the instant a thing folds without a mouth, and the wayfinders found nothing, because there was nothing to find, because the gray hull did not leave a thing for an eye to hold. It was simply gone, the way fog is gone, somewhere else now, in front of some other cruel arrival, holding some other door open for some other small world. The captain's plain order, still running quiet, on its cold gray bridge. We outpatient an empire. Hold the door. And because it was never found, it became, in the telling, exactly what Tomu Sorel had called it in the first frightened hour, on the open flock channel, before he knew it had a name. It became the ghost. The hull that folds without a mouth. The thing that does the Sodality's own trick, better than the Sodality, and only ever points people home. Mothers on the folded-in worlds, the worlds that were slowly remembering how to be free, told it to their hatchlings, not as a monster, but as the opposite of a monster, the patient gray shape that stands in front of the cruel thing and waits for everyone to get tired. It is somewhere in the deep right now, they told the small ones. It does not chase, it does not boast. If you are ever the small world with nowhere to stand, it will come and stand in front of the thing that is taking you, and it will hold the door, and it will not stop holding the door, no matter how many of them come, until they walk back through it. And the small ones slept easier for knowing, the way Tomu Sorel himself had slept easier, in the end, for knowing. There was a thing the freed worlds came to understand, slowly, in the 40 years of the undoing, and it was the deepest lesson the gray hull ever taught, deeper even than the lesson it taught the fleet at the crossing. It was this. The Sodality had ruled 4,000 worlds for 9,000 years, and had never, in all that time, had to face a single morning of reckoning, because it had never left a wound that anyone could point to. It had taken worlds gently, bloodlessly, all at once, so cleanly that there was never a massacre to mourn or a tyrant to overthrow, and that very cleanness had been its armor. You cannot rise up against a thing that never hurt you in a way you can name. The Sodality had been cruel in the one way that leaves no scar, the cruelty of taking a people's choice while smiling. And for 9,000 years, no one had been able to fight it, because there was nothing to fight, no place to push, no wound to rally around. And the gray hull had beaten it with the very same weapon, turned around. It had been kind in the one way that leaves no answer. It had refused to give the Sodality a wound to rally around, a massacre to avenge, a tyrant to hate. It had simply stood, and waited, and let them go, and left them with nothing to be angry at, and nothing to fight, and nothing to do but go home, and slowly understand. The sodality had ruled by giving its victims no place to stand. The gray hull had won by giving the sodality no place to stand either. No enemy to be brave against, only a kindness they could not avenge, and a question they could not answer. It had beaten them with their own oldest trick, made gentle, and that, the freed worlds came to understand, was the whole shape of it. You cannot rise up against a thing that never hurt you, and you cannot make war on a thing that will not hurt you back. The sodality had learned the first half of that truth long ago, and built an empire on it. The humans had learned the second half, and ended one. He was old by the time the sodality finished coming apart, and it did not come apart into ruin. That was the strange gift of the way the gray hull had fought. Because it had killed no one, there was no blood to avenge, no burned court to rebuild in anger, no fleet ground into wreckage to leave a wound that festered for 1,000 years. There was only a question, asked of 4,000 worlds, and answered, slowly, by 4,000 worlds deciding for themselves what kind of people they wanted to be, now that the fear had died. Some of the worlds folded away from the sodality entirely and went their own way. Some stayed together, but threw out the court and the trick, and the whole idea that being elsewhere made them better than the people they had ruled. Demonhold, the small world that had asked the first honest question, became a kind of crossroads, a place where the freed worlds met to talk, and they hung in its meeting hall a single gray banner, plain, no words on it, in honor of a ship whose name they never learned and whose face they never saw, the thing that had stood in front of the cruel arrival and held the door. Tomu Sorel lived to see it hung. He was very old by then. He had spent the back half of his life as the teller of the story, the wayfinder who had seen the ghost first and never stopped saying what he saw, and the freed worlds knew his name, though he had never wanted them to. They asked him, sometimes, at the crossroads, what the gray hull had really been, whether it had been a god, the way the legend half said, whether it would come back. He always answered the same way, because 200 turns of seeing first had taught him to say only what was true. It was not a god, he would say, in his old honest voice. It was a ship, built by people who had been taken the way you were almost taken, and who got tired of small worlds having nowhere to stand. That is all it was. It was the most ordinary thing in the universe, which is people who were hurt and decided not to pass the hurt along. We thought we were the strong ones, because we could never be struck. They were the strong ones, because they could strike anything, and chose, over and over, for 3 days, to point us home instead. That is a kind of strength we did not have a word for. I have spent my whole old life trying to learn the word. I think the word is mercy, but I am not sure we mean by it what they mean by it. They meant it as a weapon, the only weapon that ever beat us, the only one that could. And when they asked if it would come back, the old wayfinder would look out at the deep he had charted for 200 turns, the deep that had taught him at the very end that it could still hold a thing his eyes had never been able to, and he would tell them the truest thing he knew. It never left, he would say. It is out there now, in front of someone. It does not chase. It does not boast. It holds the door. If you are good to the small worlds, you will never see it, and that is the whole of its kindness, that the worlds it saves get to go on never knowing. And if you are ever the cruel arrival, the proud fleet certain the spear cannot find you, the people who have decided a free world is a loose thread to be pulled, then one day a gray shape you cannot hold will be standing in the long dark between you and the thing you came to take, and it will write 3 words on your proudest hull, and it will not fire, and it will not stop being elsewhere, and it will hold the door open at your back for as long as it takes you to grow tired and walk through it. We grew tired in 3 days. You will too. Everyone does. You cannot outwait a thing that has decided to be kind to you until you stop. We are the proof. We were the people the spear could not find, and a ghost found us, and pointed us home, and let us live. And that is why there are 4,000 free worlds, where there used to be 4,000 frightened ones. Not because it killed us, because it would not. He died at the crossroads, old and unafraid, and the freed worlds folded his small, fast trader into the deep, the way his people had always sent their dead, out into the dark he had loved and charted, and finally been humbled by. And on its plain gray flank, in the trade script every fold people could read, they had burned 3 words, the only 3 words the ghost had ever said, the words that had ended an empire without ending a single life. Turn around now. It was not a warning, the way they wrote it on him. It was a thank you. Because Tomu Sorel had turned around, in the first frightened hour, when he wrote in the small honest hatchling script that he hoped the gray hull won. He had turned around before his whole empire did, and spent his life pointing 4,000 worlds toward the same door, and the freed worlds understood, in the way the gray hull had taught a whole galaxy to understand, that the bravest thing a proud people can do is be the first one to grow tired of being cruel, and turn around, and walk through the door that the patient gray thing in the dark has been holding open the whole time. Somewhere in the deep, the door is still open. The gray hull is still elsewhere, cold and quiet and patient, 3,700 meters of mercy that the spear cannot find, standing in front of some new cruel arrival above some new small world, holding the only door it ever holds. It does not chase. It does not boast. It has not fired, and it will not fire, because the people who built it learned, the long hard way, that the surest victory in all the universe is the one where the other side gets to live, and gets to leave, and gets, at the very last, to be the ones who chose to walk away. That is no ship anyone knows. It moves like a ghost, and wherever it appears in the long dark, the proud fleets, in the end, every single time, grow tired, and turn around, and flee toward the open door at their backs, and call it, ever after, the only enemy that ever beat them by refusing, for 3 patient days, to do them any harm at all.